4, 3, 2, 1. All right, everybody, we're live. First episode we're doing on a Monday. A very personal, emotional episode for me. Very excited to have you guys here. I have Zach Ingrasci and Chris Temple. You guys have, as always, Yaya's in the house and our producer Naveed.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to NomadLand. It's been a while. We're very happy to be back. We have two special guests today, and we're doing another interview or a podcast or a conversation with people the world needs to know about. And these two people, the world kind of knows already about, so that's kind of exciting. But I'll have them introduce themselves, please.
Yeah, we're excited to be here. I'm Zach. This is Chris. We've been filmmakers for the last 5 years, but we call ourselves accidental filmmakers because definitely didn't plan on being here, doing this full time. So we actually studied economics in college. And
how do dreams come true by accident?
Oh man, we can tell you our story is how they come true by accident.
Yeah.
And I feel like you just go for it, and that's been our whole story, is getting out there and just.
But it's a good question,
chances.
though, right? Because so many people work their ass off to get to where they want to be, and then somebody's here accomplished and says, "I got there by accident." Is it really an accident?
Well, I think that's a good point, though, because we work hard. I think
But I think you have to be. I think one of the big things we've seen is that first step that often holds people back. And you know, a lot of times we were told, you should do what your passion is. But when we were in college, it was like, I don't know what my passion is yet. Yeah. But if you follow some curiosity first, and you're willing to see where that takes you, it can lead to passion.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you fell into the path by accident. Yeah. But how it happened was not an accident. You guys, worked your ass off. And
exactly.
Took action, acted upon it.
Yeah, for sure.
So you guys met in college, right?
Yes, we lived in the same hallway for the same dorm.
Same majors?
Yeah, we both studied economics and international relations. So.
Freshman year.
Yeah, freshman year in college.
Love at first sight,
Yeah. So you guys in the same class sitting next to each other? Like, how does this happen?
Well, probably more like we were drinking in the same place and started talking about things that we both care a lot about.
Yeah.
We both had a passion for traveling, had spent some time, especially in Latin America. And that kind of sparked this desire to spend more time outside of our own bubbles. And I grew up in literally an island up in Seattle.
Complete different background.
Huh? Yeah. And Chris grew up in Connecticut. So, I don't know, it was important just to get out of there and travel and see the world, and showed us a lot of things. And that kind of sparked a mutual desire to keep pushing that further and further. And that's really what led us to end up actually spending our summer break after our sophomore year of college living under $1 a day for 2 months in this rural village in Guatemala. And it was really just meant to be this summer of pushing ourselves and really diving deep and understanding how someone lives at that level. It was never meant to be this film that's now on Netflix. It was really just meant to be a summer.
You went there for the experience, and then the film happened.
Exactly.
Wow.
Before we get to the film, I just want us to get a little bit more familiar with you two, if it's okay, so that way people can kind of get to know how these people met and then what gets them to do what they do. So your background was mostly, you grew up in a small town, in a farm town?
Yeah, it's a kind of like a middle class, or upper class community. Yeah. But my family, I literally shared a wall with a horse. I watched my brother be born. It was a bit of a hippie situation.
Yeah.
Wow. My mom was into goddess worship. She's a middle school counselor, very cool lady. My dad's was a private investigator. I mean, there was a guy living in a TV.
Your dad's a private investigator?
We say he's in the CIA.
We don't talk about my dad.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. But it was a wild place. And
that's awesome.
I think early on, my godfather actually took me to Tibet when I was 10.
Whoa.
And we spent a month building this traditional art school in Tibet. And without my parents, just my godfather
actually building the building.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
In this little tiny mountain village, and that's really what first got me interested in travel.
Whoa, so that's where that comes from.
Way back.
And then with you, your mom was a therapist. How was that nightmare? Because mine was too.
The therapist mom. Shout out to them. So yeah, I'm willing to be very emotionally vulnerable thanks to my mother. But no, it was interesting. We had a similar upbringing in the being instilled with this idea to travel, where my parents are actually both from the UK, and they came here as immigrants to the US, and then we'd constantly travel back and forth to to England to visit family, and then all over the world. And then actually my parents got divorced when I was younger, and it actually was great because they'd compete for who could take us on more interesting trips. So I went like all over the world, traveling to all these interesting places.
That's awesome.
And so I had that kind of same idea of being instilled with this idea of travel and service around the world. Yeah. But in a different contrast, kind of the community where I grew up was in Connecticut, suburban Connecticut. It was very conservative, actually. It was pretty insular and hyper wealthy. And like the idea that there was a lot of a lack of awareness about what was happening outside of this Connecticut bubble. And so I knew, you know, the second I left kind of high school, I was looking for something that was the complete opposite of that. And I took a year off to travel in that year. And that's when I started getting involved in more of the international development work and traveling around the world for that year.
So both of you guys had pretty unique backgrounds, and then you find each other, and then you're drinking, and then you start talking about things that leads to mutual interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what was that real mutual thing that led to your projects?
I'd say like the first thing was really microfinance, wouldn't you say? So we both had worked for and interned with organizations doing microfinance work, which is the service of providing loans and savings accounts to help the extreme poor help themselves. And it's happening all over the world. It started in Bangladesh, really, with Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. And so we kind of started nerding out around this concept and why didn't more people know about it and how could we get more people involved. Yeah. And we even started a kind of a organization on our campus to get more students involved in microfinance around the world. We took students to conferences, a number of things like that. And that ended up kind of leading us to this idea that if we wanted to work in microfinance and be a part of it, we needed to learn more about what is the financial reality for someone living under $1 a day. So like if we don't
break down microfinance a little more.
Yeah. So it's really,
because I bet the audience is dying to know.
Definitely. Yeah. No, microfinance, it's so fascinating. And we honestly, we fall in love with this concept of, you know, so many people around the world don't have access to a simple bank account or a loan. And so if you're living on $1 a day and you don't have access to like a big amount of money at one time, you can't start a business, you can't improve your life. And so microfinance has kind of come in just to meet that very specific need, and recognizing that people really what they're lacking is not talent, it's just an opportunity. And so we saw that as a great way to help people all over the world and support different services like that. So Living on $1, our film actually raises money for microfinance work in Guatemala.
That's funny. So the movie kind of became like this marketable strategy to kind of use the microfinance background. Like you made it more appealing, you made it more digestible, you made it in a way where people actually want to see it and do something with it.
Yeah, we were nerding out about this stuff, but of course for a lot of people, they were like, this sounds horribly boring.
Yeah, like
so,
microfinance.
But I think the thing that the film does is it gives you the stories of our neighbors there who are just incredible. And as soon as you have this emotional connection with a kid like Chino, who's like 12 years old, or Rosa, who's studying to become a nurse, you know, that's really where it makes it human. And it turns these like this finance thing into a very tangible and emotional.
So like a good example is like, I mean, even this shirt that I'm wearing, this is a handmade fabric by Rosa. And so she took out a microfinance.
Oh, she actually made it.
Yeah, so she took out a microfinance loan to start a weaving business. It was a $200 loan, which seems like nothing, right? Wow. But then she could get all the supplies she needed to start this business. And then
why South America?
Well, we both speak Spanish, and it's like Guatemala was pretty close. Chris had actually spent a while there with Muhammad Yunus in this incredibly beautiful area, Lake Atitlan, that has these volcanoes surrounding this lake, and there's tons of tourism, but just up the mountain there's extreme poverty. Yeah. And so we had some connections in this community, but just enough to convince our parents to be like, okay, you know, this isn't too crazy. Yeah. And then really it was just meant to be this summer, so it wasn't this huge decision. It was just it wasn't much of a decision at all, and we just spent the summer there.
So the decision is what exactly? When you guys decide on it, this is what we're going to do. What is that?
So we came up with this idea to try to go and live on $1 a day ourselves in this rural village in Guatemala, and then film it and put up short YouTube videos about it while we were doing it. So at the time, there was never a documentary in the process. It was really just these short YouTube videos. And then, you know, kind of from ideation to actually getting there is always harder than you think it will be, right?
Yeah.
So we applied for funding from 12 different sources, didn't get it from any of them, and we kind
How
of
much?
it was about $10,000 what we were looking for the whole project, and then
did not get that money.
yeah, which we did not get the money for. And then at the very end, actually, we had a nonprofit organization came in and said, we'll give you $3,000. Could you do it on that? And we looked at, we were like, okay, with flights, $1 a day each, like, I think we can pull it off. And so we went and we did it on, in the end, about $4,000.
Are you guys excited now?
I was actually going to ask about the
Yeah.
funding. Was very interesting to me to know where you
Yeah.
guys got the money from. So
Yeah.
you got pretty much less than a third of the budget that you're looking for.
Right.
And then when you went there, you had 2 cameramen.
So
And
2
then
buddies
so-
from high school that I grew
Okay.
up with, and one of them, Sean, had never been out of the country before. I mean, he had been to Japan, which his mom's from, but that was it. And so the first couple
was a rude
weeks
awakening.
were really
He
rough.
was the real victim.
Yeah.
And he really felt like I had tricked him into going, which
Mom,
the end.
calling home every day. Mom, I don't know.
exactly,
No,
like
no
he hadn't
phones for
said
the
a
call back.
single
He's
word
doing
for the
hostage
fir-
videos.
Yeah,
he
it
couldn't
was
even call
bad.
back. He had no phone.
And he really didn't know what to expect. And I remember this moment, like sitting in between my 2 best friends in the world, Chris on this side and Sean on that side, and they
Yeah.
were both just so mad at me because Sean was like, "You tricked me into coming," and Chris was like, "You told me this was this incredible filmmaker. He hasn't said a single word for an entire week."
Yeah.
It was nuts. So it was like, it was a wild experience. And I think that first week we didn't know anyone, so it was really tough and trying to adjust and trying to live at that level and basically eating half the calories we should be, getting sick.
I need to go.
But as soon as we met Chino, who was like that 12-year-old boy, he was really like the most adventurous of the kids. They were all, watching us like the funniest telenovela, ever. He made that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we got to know his story and got to start to know the community.
Kept getting more emotionally involved.
Yeah. And then it became easy. Well, easier for us. And then, but understanding what they were going through, and we got to leave at the end of the summer, but they didn't. And
How
it was
hard did
way
it
harder.
hit you guys in the first week? Like, how was that experience?
Man,
Like you guys looking at it like, or the Asian
So-
kid just like, what was going on? Explain it.
So there are a couple things that we did, to make it a little bit harder on ourselves or more closely mirror the life of somebody who's living in extreme
Right.
poverty, right? So we had $1 a day each, but instead of just giving ourselves $1 every day, we
Random.
actually
Broke
took
it
that. Yeah, we took that and split it into random numbers, and every day we'd pick a number out of a hat, and that'd be our income for the day.
Yeah.
And it's because actually, if you're living in extreme poverty, you don't actually just get $1 a day. That's
Exact
just
amount.
a stat. It's like
Nothing's
it's kind of
guaranteed.
misleading. And most people work informally, so you have like 3 days with work and 5 days without it, and yada yada. So that first week, we're pulling numbers. And it's $1 for the 4 of us, like $3 for the 4 of us, and that's supposed to be for not only just food, but for everything that we're dealing with, for emergencies, for blankets, for water, for firewood, for all this different stuff. And so it immediately just actually got us into arguments about the way to spend
How
our
to
money,
spend it.
how to spend
Yeah.
the money. Because you're like, oh, we've got $4, and
You guys needed a behind the scene like footage type of thing, right?
Oh yeah, we've got some of it up on YouTube too.
This
There's
could
some
actually
good,
be a sitcom if you flip it.
yeah, exactly. No, there's some good conversations of Zach and I. There's one in the film where we get in an argument over whether or not to buy a chicken, which was
a terrible idea. We
I
should not buy a
thought we
chicken.
should invest in an asset like a chicken
to
up
get
front
eggs
so we
and-
could get eggs and be
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
sustainable.
We would have gotten ripped off and sold the worst chicken.
yeah.
Like, we were
Yeah.
gringos, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have bought a rooster probably
Exactly.
if we're
Like,
being
where are
real.
the eggs?
Yeah. But no, that was the kind of challenge in the beginning, and it kind of fast forwarding throughout it. We lost 22 pounds each in 8 weeks there. So you're looking at the amount that we were eating. It was about 900 calories each per day. And came back from the lack of clean water. We got Giardia and E. coli, so different
actually got
parasites.
both.
Yeah, yeah.
And the cameraman too.
Everyone got sick.
Oh.
We only show Chris getting sick in the film because you only want to see so much.
Yeah,
It's
the
like-
whole film could have just been 30 minutes of people throwing up, but
You had good
that's not
footage.
compelling. Yeah.
Throwing up and all that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I
It
took
was
the
tough.
camera into the bathroom with me, but that didn't make the film. Yeah.
Wow. So then you settle in, and you pretty much, at what point do you get the hang of things, or do you ever really get the hang of things?
You can only get, so much. the community helped us out a lot. So learning how to make tortillas from scratch every day. I mean, the amount of work that a traditional woman, like, you know, a mom in one of these families does. I mean, she'll wake up before dawn, she'll go down the mountain, find the firewood, carry it on her head all the way back. She'll start the fire, make tortillas from scratch every morning, and feed the entire family. For example, our friend Tono, he'll go to work, and then Rosa, his wife, will then go clean like onions all day and take care of all of the kids. And it's just a wild life. And, you know, we didn't have any women supporting us, and we didn't have to. It was hard.
Who played the woman role?
we all did. It was tough, but there's so much work.
You're cooking for about, 4 or 5 hours a day. I mean, over an open fire to collect the firewood and put it together and try to boil. You know, we were basically just eating either making homemade tortillas or eating rice and occasionally beans if we could afford it.
And the locals are looking at you guys like, what's wrong with y'all? Like, these motherfuckers are crazy?
At first, yes, and then
they didn't get it. And how do you explain it to them?
It took a long time, and so we continue to explain what these documentaries mean, and I think until we actually went back with the film and showed them before, because we always show our subjects before we release the film to make sure that they're comfortable, because these are very personal stories. Then I think they got it, and they're like, oh, like, this is what you were doing. So it took going back over and over, and every year we go back for the last 8 years. We're really lucky enough to be able to continue to tell those stories and follow up on them. And
so much of it.
They start to now they really get it.
That's
really
one of the things I noticed and I loved on your, and it's all on your YouTube channel, that you keep going back, so you see the progress and the money, that you see the actions actually happening and helping them with the schools. With that girl going to nursing school, finally, her story was so touching. Right?
That's Rosa, who started with just this microfinance loan.
And now she just graduated from high school at 27, and she's in nursing school for the last 3 years. And that little film we actually released via the Atlantic and Nat Geo, and it raised $90,000 for other women in that community to go to university. Rosa was the first person ever to go to university in that village.
Man or
woman.
Her story. Because like the whole thing of reach your dreams and be positive always is something that I talk about a lot in my music. And when she was talking about her story in the beginning, I was like I was kind of pessimistic. I'm like, what dreams are you going to reach? Like, in such a horrible situation. Like, she actually went through it and did it, and that was very touching for me.
She's a huge inspiration for a lot of women in that community, because the traditional role is really, you know, to be at home and have a family, and she's kind of broken that mold. Basically, she got pregnant, then the guy left her, their family kicked her out. They were telling her to have an abortion. She didn't. Then she had the baby. The baby had she had a birth defect, that she had like extra fluid in her skull, and she had to go through surgery 3 times. It was just like crazy. And then when she went to nursing school and she got her life together,
and that was her inspiration to become the nurse, was her experiences with her kid. And you know, you kind of see, and that's like what was interesting is, you know, we learned about Rosa's story, the real story, after, you know, 3, 4, 5 years together. And so much of these films are about trust.
Oh, you didn't know about it in the
You have to take no. I mean, when you first get in there, I mean, it takes time for somebody to really want to tell you their story, tell you everything about what's going on with them. And so even our first 2 weeks in Guatemala, we actually didn't even really film much with people. We mostly just got to know people, have conversations, and then started bringing out the cameras at a later point to have more of the conversation on camera. But I mean, I think
that's a big thing that we talk about, is how do you set up that trust. And initially, and with our next film, Salam Neighbor, we actually had a tent in a refugee camp, and having our own tent and inviting people in and being able to share tea instead of just kind of invading their space was huge in building that trust.
Because oftentimes when foreigners come, you know, it's not always good news.
Right. You know, like, if it's like, another, you know, foreigner in my tent, in my space. And it was so cool to have our own.
And cameras are intense. I mean, you come in and you put a camera in someone's face and you start asking them really personal questions, especially, I mean, we were asking people about like where they save money. And like, if somebody started knocking on your door with a camera and they're from a different country, they come from Guatemala and start knocking on your door, you're not going to tell them where you're saving money or tell them, you know, where your dreams came from.
You guys are still actively involved with their story. That's beautiful. And because I bet it feels wrong if you were to cover their story and then just leave, and then you would feel somewhat of a hypocrite and probably guilty, but you guys have made it work where not only yourselves but people are interested still in their stories.
I think it's one of the
is that a conscious effort, a conscious intention going in
for us? I mean, because we have
great
we're
hearts.
so close with them, it's like it is. I mean, we just are. We want to be going back, and being able to tell that story in a compelling way allows.
But it helps the cause too, though.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, even on a business standpoint, it makes sense, I believe, right?
Yeah, we've
and I don't
raised
think
over $1 million for that community in
Wow,
Peña Blanca. We've been
beautiful.
able to build a school, and now we're able to tell
beautiful.
the stories of the kids who go to that school and are. We've not a huge following on social, but they're so active, and like this audience who met people through the film and then are able to follow through these little videos. I mean, they're able to contribute every year and sponsor these new kids and new generations to actually get an education. And that's, it's been 8 years of that, and we get to keep telling that story.
That's awesome.
So it's really fun to be able to do.
Yeah, that's when I think when financial help, a lot of times people think, oh, you're just gonna get people, bags of rice and food, but when you actually make things like this, they like schools and or create opportunities for them to make more money and sell things. I mean, that's just so much more effective.
And that's the key. I mean, being able to give, we built a preschool because kids learning Spanish, they speak Cachiquel, which is a Mayan dialect. And if they don't learn Spanish early, then you're never really gonna be able to get a job. And so a lot of that early education we found is so critical. And it's so much better than just like a little handout.
And we honestly feel like so privileged to be able to continue with their stories. And what I mean by that is so many journalists that we've run into out in the field or filming in the refugee camp when we were there, they'd have 3 hours to go in with a mandate to tell a specific story, right?
Know, that's what I'm talking about.
They have to come in and they're forced to put a camera in someone's face and say, like, tell me your most traumatic experiences. Whereas for us, we could just take the time to get to know someone first.
Isn't that kind of some of that old school versus the new way of the possibilities of doing things and covering stories and podcasting? And it just now it's somewhat easier to take a full story, and people are being interested in that full story.
So much easier. I mean, even if it was 10 years ago, we would never have been able to like have 2 DSLR cameras and
Just, like, go and do it.
Record a very high quality piece. And it's amazing. I mean, our jobs would not exist.
And then getting it out there.
Yeah.
Impossible. Unless some big distributor wanted to get it to people, right?
Yeah.
Because with our small
platform like Netflix,
our small film living on $1 with like no budget, no marketing. I mean, no one was going to watch that film. So we came up with an idea to just drive it around the country and just project it onto different buildings and to show it at universities and wherever it was. And that ended up getting kind of building up an audience and picking people up along the way to become a part of it. And then digitally it kind of got onto iTunes and Netflix and Hulu.
5 years for Netflix, right?
Yeah, basically. Netflix eventually. And I mean, the amount of times we tweeted at them, emailed them, went through connections to try to get us to them, but that's really what it took.
And that's the platform it's done the best on. It just was huge, and it's finding that right platform for the story where maybe the theater wasn't the right place, but someone being able to pull it up on Netflix all around the world.
And how did you know, if you could trust them or if it's the right move, or you guys are new? Like, how did you know that at the time?
We had a lot of incredible advisors, having people who mentored us, who'd been in the space for a long time.
How'd you find them?
We just aggressively emailing people, just like believing in the story that we had and
that's
the
one
content.
Of the things you do, with the email thing, I guess.
We just go after people that we want to talk to, and
I think if you're respectful, and if you're respectful of people's time when you're doing it, we saw this one amazing guy's YouTube video he gave a TED talk about supporting young social entrepreneurs, and we were like, we want to talk to this guy. We emailed him, and he's become an amazing advisor and board member to us for years, and kind of those things can go a really long way, and people email us a lot too, and I always have to remind myself, you got to pay it forward. You got to pay it forward, even though I'm busy and you've got so much stuff going on, to take the time to especially for the ones who have shown that they're making an effort already. If somebody emails me and says like, I want to make a difference, how? I'm like, okay, well, you got to give me something to work with here a little bit. But if somebody emails me being like, all right, I started this podcast and here are the first 3 episodes, but I'm struggling with this one part of it, and could you maybe help advise me on these 3 questions? I'll respond to those 100% of the time.
It seems like you guys have figured out the real currency of this universe, which is not money, but there's other things and other factors, right?
so much so.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the space we're in, a lot of people give their time and energy, and you know, we're not talking about big money in documentaries. So having this family that we've been able to create around these films is critical. They just like would not exist without that. So I totally agree. That is
so then
hugely valuable.
You guys, that's your first experience in South America, and then you come back. What have you learned from that experience? Like, what are you taking with you? What do you know about yourself? What do you know about your future? Does it seem much more clear, or are you just more confused? Or
at that time?
Yeah. No, today. Yeah, that
time. I mean, I think leaving after that experience, I mean, there was a lot of frustration, a lot of inner guilt, honestly, that we were dealing with. I mean, we got to leave after a couple months living in this community, but our friends there were still there. And I think for us, the key was two things. One was just, again, naturally keeping in touch with people there. The fact that they were on Facebook and we could have these conversations helped us feel closer to it, helped us feel more connected. And then two was just doing something. You know, we had this frustration. The best cure for guilt is action, is just getting out there and doing something. So we really channeled it all into trying to make the movie. And that's what we ended up doing was, hey, why don't we make a documentary that can tell their stories?
And you guys are feeding off on each other's energy. Are you guys on the same page with everything? Are you guys seeing eye to eye? Is there big conflicts?
I think there's been a lot of moments where, you know, you're never always inspired. You know what I mean? Like you're going to have highs and lows. It's like a wave, right? And so what's nice is rarely are both of our troughs happening at the same time. Like one will be there to pick the other one up when we need it and vice versa. And so like, it's actually been so helpful to have a co-founder who you can bounce off of.
But
things
it can
off
get testy, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we have our arguments for sure.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I couldn't,
especially
I didn't find too much of stuff in terms of you guys' arguments and things like that. I mean, is there anything that like we could learn from about how you guys overcame the differences so he can learn?
Man, I mean, I think we both respect where we're coming from. So if we disagree, at least we still have that like respect there. So
and respect is earned. You know, it's like you over time, like we've made a lot of decisions together, and we've recognized that sometimes one's right and the other person could, and then the next time the other person's right. So through all of that experience together, now if we get in a disagreement about something creatively, you at least recognize, oh, there might be validity to what this guy's saying. Right. You know, like you go. And so, I mean, a lot of it honestly is experience. It's great that like we can. You know, some of our new editors and people who work with us, they laugh that we can communicate without words. You know, they'll be like, well, you guys are always already 3 steps ahead of what the rest of people are talking about because you just make that decision.
You're so
really
aligned
fast.
and you're so used to
Yeah, and we're like, oh, perfect. Yeah, that's where you're at. Okay, great. Let's move on now. And
so you guys are still together. You just dumped the 2 cameramen.
I'll
Sean
cut that,
still
I'll
works
cut
with you
that
guys,
part
though?
out.
Yeah.
You don't want me. No.
He's not,
no, they're still involved.
So we actually so Sean is amazing. He's a creative director for Odessa, an electronic band that we grew up with. Okay. Out of Seattle.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a big deal.
They're like selling out stadiums and stuff. But he's just like this incredible creative spirit, and he's never like only done one thing. So we like tap into him, you know, when there's a project that he's really into and we're all, you know, into, but it's never actually been full time for him. So he's incredible. He edited Living on $1. He shot most of it. Ryan, who helped shoot it as well, has been a big part. But, you know, we're all like still a big part of this work. And Chris and I are the ones that have been full time on this project for the last 5 years or so.
And as you know, like, I mean, these passion projects, you got to dedicate a lot of your life to, and you got to kind of live and breathe it. And if it's not, I mean, like for Ryan, he had more interest in going a different direction and going more into teaching and in other directions. Like, hey, you know, go and do that. We support that. And you know.
Now he lives in Thailand and Chiang Mai and is like a coder out there,
digital
and
nomad,
has this, like,
out
amazing
there.
lifestyle.
Wow.
So he's built a pretty cool thing.
Is there? Well, let's go to Syria, huh? You ready?
Before doing that, I have a question about in Peña Blanca, Guatemala. In an interview you did, you were mentioned that through all the stress and the hard life, you thought that they kind of experienced joy in a way that you never have before, and it seems to be common in different communities around the world that are through extreme poverty. They kind of have
thank
that.
you for bringing this up. Yeah.
What do you think that is? I mean, is it just because they have less mental traffic, less stimulation from, you know, big cities, or what is it?
Well, there's a couple things. One is, to survive in that situation, you have to have community. And so just the level of having a tribe and having trust, that level of trust with so many people to take care of your kids when you're out working, or to, I mean, we were just there for a wedding, and, you know, it's like a 4-day ordeal, and, you know, they have very little, but the incredible feast they come up with, and, you know, they're tapping into, you know, many people, and it's a truly a community that's much more developed than anything I've ever experienced. And I think seeing that for the first time was pretty mind-blowing for me.
I think it was something coming back and just seeing the lack of it in many ways around the U.S., the lack of the social fabrics that are holding us together, the lack of generosity of time even that often happens. We were seeing
in our own lives, especially, not just the U.S., but just personally, and that has been so cool to be in a small way a part of. You know, I grew up on like a hippie commune, so it got a little bit of that, but it was at a much smaller scale than Peña Blanca.
And I think it's also, some of it is we have to deal with so many things that aren't really necessary to live, you know, because part of a schedule and things that we deal with, and they don't, you know.
Beauty is in the simplicity.
It's like they're lighter in general, you know. It's like a lighter load in some sense.
The unnecessary attachments that we just pile up thinking we need them, but it doesn't really serve us. It's just a distraction, right?
Yeah, we've learned a lot from them. And we do, I mean, we're not necessarily minimalists per se, but like we try and take certain things. You strip away a lot of stuff that's unnecessary. And a lot of that comes from this community that just, they don't have it and they don't need it, and they get by without it.
Is there a conflict though? Because it's interesting. Like, you're covering people that are suffering, but the point is to make it successful, and then that can lead into financial success. So does that create some sort of like inner conflict, or you want to capture a good footage, and obviously, you know, the more emotional the scene, the better the footage, like, and you're like, oh, this is good, or do you feel bad for, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I think there have been a number of moments where I'm holding a camera and I'm crying behind the scenes, you know, like I have tears rolling down my face as the camera's rolling, but my job, and the best way I could potentially have a positive impact on what I'm seeing is to keep that camera rolling.
I got tear-eyed multiple times just watching it right now. So imagine up front, they're personal. It's just very much,
And that's just of what ended up making it into the film. Whereas, you know, for each film, we're filming 250 hours of footage and all this stuff and all these moments and these stories that, you know, one of the hardest things to us actually are the people whose stories you don't use in the films, because you often speak to 10, 15 different people, do all these different interviews. You're filming with all these people, but at the end, in the editing room, you kind of it comes down to, you know, 3 main characters or 3 main stories that all fit together. And I think it's really, really hard when somebody gave you so much in telling their story, and it didn't fit into that film. So what we've done now is actually, like, a lot of why we use YouTube and these other things are we take those little stories and we're putting them into these other chunks out on short videos for Facebook or YouTube, so that those stories can live and breathe and do them justice. But that's hard. Like, that takes time and money and effort, but I think it helps you feel better at the end of the day.
What about you? Like, is it similar for you?
Yeah, I mean, being a documentary filmmaker is so interesting because you do have to create boundaries as well. And as we've kind of matured as filmmakers, you understand what those boundaries are, and you really learn from a lot of journalistic practice how you set kind of boundaries with your subjects, and that's something we've been learning a lot about. So how do we tell a story that's really that's really true to the story, and how do we, you know, because we are going back and we have these like such personal relationships, where do those boundaries lie, and that's been a really cool part of learning, of being able to maintain those friends. So, like, you know, you never want to, there's so much, like, for example, there's so much need in these communities, but as a filmmaker, it's not a good thing for me to personally give to my subject, because it creates a relationship where, you know, they feel like they have to be telling their story, or like it creates a very specific dynamic. And instead,
they're trying to please you.
Please me and tell me things that maybe they're not comfortable telling, or it just creates a relationship that can be abusive in some ways. And instead, our films raise money through nonprofits. It's all anonymous, so it's not from Chris and Zach. It's from Living on One, or it's from Mind Families works in the community, so it's all through them. The school is built by Mind Families, is not built by Chris and Zach. And so we've been able to figure out a way to maintain our personal relationships without creating a situation that could be abusive or negative. And so that part has been really a learning experience, right? Your gut reaction when you're watching your really close friend struggle is to immediately just give them something.
That's right.
And in some ways that's not always doing good. How do you your good intentions, how do you manage your good intentions? And that's something that we've both learned a lot, and I think we've created boundaries and kind of a system for giving back through our films that's much more appropriate.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
What a big lesson.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, let's fast forward to Syria. And how did that happen? Why Syria? And then how did you get involved with UNHCR? And
Wow, it's been such
so
a
ahead of
cool
your time
experience.
with that too, by the way.
Yeah, and I mean, when we first started hearing about the crisis, the refugee crisis in Syria and what was happening, it was 2013, and nobody was really talking. People were only talking about the war, and no one was talking about the refugee crisis or the families that were walking away. And when you looked at, the more and more we kind of looked into it, we were just seeing that there was no way this crisis wasn't going to reach the boiling point that it eventually did when the world started paying attention to it.
So we were aware of that, but it really took, again, a human connection to get us invested and to take that step and actually understand more at a deeper level. And we met this woman named Salam Neighbor, who actually lives in Manhattan Beach, really close to here. And she's the daughter of Palestinian refugees. And she told us her story, and it was like, wow, I've never confronted what it means to be forced to flee your home and forced to start your life in a new country where you might not even have the same rights as citizens. And hearing her story and at the same time being aware of what was happening in Syria just made us just really have to understand more. And it was at a time when these stories weren't being told. And
you guys were already thinking about working on another project at that time. Was there a close second? Was there anything else that you guys were like, maybe this or that?
Well, what was interesting was, again, and maybe this is just how all these films or projects happen, but at the time it wasn't supposed to be a really big project. We thought, okay, maybe we'll spend we'll spend a month filming. We did really want to do, spend a while in a refugee camp. We ended up pitching the United Nations on the idea of allowing us to be the first filmmakers to actually live inside of a refugee camp, so we could take the time to get to know people, build that trust, and not just be a journalist running in with a camera for 2 hours and then leaving.
And, I mean, you would think something like that it'd be very easy to do, but it's not. Because I started working with UNHCR earlier this year, and I'm kind of working on a similar project. And it's very tough for them to give you the okay and who's representing them and what they're, you know what I mean? So
So it took about 11 months even to get the permission from the UN, and it wasn't only the UN. We then had to go through the Jordanian government, and eventually the king himself had to sign off on it to allow us to actually live inside of the camp, on Zaatari refugee camp on the border with Syria and Jordan. So, as we were developing this idea, it took about that 11-month period for it to eventually come to life. And at the time, it was only supposed to be a 20-minute documentary. So again, we were like, we'll make this short film. It'll be done in 6 months, and this will be like a really worthwhile story that we get out into the world. But the second we met these characters, met different people in the refugee camp, saw the depth of this story, I mean, we came back and we knew the instant we were back. We knew while we were in the camp.
It's hour and 15 minutes, 13 minutes?
75, hour and 15.
Yeah, and then you had to cut so much even for it to get to that much.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we had like 300 hours of footage for, a 75-minute film. Yeah. And it's just, it's tough. It's a tough world cutting that away. And you're like, those are my favorite characters.
Was pain on another level this time.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this experience was very different than than living on $1, which was the living on
kind
$1
of forced situation. Like, they just have, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah. So like the living on $1 experience was a very physical experience for us. So, we're actually losing 22 pounds. We were getting giardia, things like that. Whereas being in the refugee camp was a lot of emotional pain of when you're sitting there and you're listening to the stories of people whose, their school was bombed and they were watching families getting dragged out of the rubble, like Raouf. And that's where we had these moments where you're really silently crying behind camera and just keeping that camera rolling.
What was the most emotional moment for you there?
I mean, there was one.
It's in the film, and Chris wanted to take this moment out of the film because it's Chris. He does start crying, and
Chris
I
doesn't want to be filmed. Chris don't play like that.
Right, exactly.
Not with that pussy shit,
And I think we try and make sure the stories aren't really about us. I think it's why Chris was uncomfortable with it. But you realize just how, it needed to be in there because you realize just how traumatic this was. And but this young kid, we found out that he didn't want to go to school, and we had kind of been pushing him into going to school. And we thought it was just, kids don't like to go to school, whatever. And we found out his school had been bombed and he was scared to go to school.
Yeah, that's very sad.
And he needed a step before that. So he actually worked with Save the Children at a children's center. And instead of just going straight to school, he started drawing and kind of exploring what some of these underlying issues before he went to school. And so that was just, first of all, hearing that story from his dad, understanding what we had been witnessing and where that pain was coming from, and then eventually seeing him starting to overcome it was just like this emotional roller coaster.
And I think it just made us realize in that moment, you set out to help, right? Or you might be in there. We wanted to help this kid get into school, and we're like, it would just be so helpful if he was back in classroom. And then you realize you don't actually know anything, right? If you don't take the time to first understand what somebody's going through, there's no way you can potentially help them. And that's kind of like one of these big lessons that we talk about a lot at schools when we're showing the film Salam Neighbor or other things.
And you guys have had that approach even in the beginning, where you guys are simply observers. They are the stars. They know their best. Even with the $1 a day, it's like they already know. They know what they're doing. They're experts. We're just going to go cover that. We're going to feel bad for them. They're professionals in their own way. And that's how I treat therapy. Who am I to know what pain means to you, what joy means to you, what love means to you? So you guys are truly going with that approach and capturing the best that they have to offer, from love to pain to joy.
Yeah, I'm glad that comes through, because that's something that we're so intentional about. Is it's so easy to project what you believe on something, on a situation, and when you step back, it's just you are always surprised, and you're always taken aback and impressed. And like you just said, people are experts in their own lives, and that's such an important thing to recognize. We talk a lot about. There's this really cool professor who actually said this. He said the most important question is to ask, how can I help? Because by actually asking how can I help, you recognize people are experts in their own lives, and that you're humble enough to kind of to realize that. And a lot of times we ask how I can help, but not to the right people. So we've learned a lot.
You don't
from
take
that.
the time to listen to the answer, you kind of try to design. You come up with your own idea of what people need instead of just asking.
Exactly.
first.
Like, so in Iran, in the southern part of Iran, there was an issue with water in one of the cities earlier this year, and it kind of got viral, and people just started sending a lot of water to them, trucks and truckloads full of water. And then it came out that we don't need bottles of water. We need to have a situation. We don't have water to shower. We don't have you guys taking the wrong action, basically. So if you don't listen, if you don't actually do the research, you're not gonna be.
It's like those good intentions can really get away with us if we aren't listening.
There are plants that don't have waters. Our animals are dying. We don't need bottled water.
Totally.
And if you send in a bunch of free water, then it might be putting somebody else out of business who's trying to sell the water. Or things like that. And then that at some point people stop giving, and then they're often in a worse situation than they were.
And I guess the way we rationalize it is we do it out of our good heart, but then again we're making it about our own selves,
right?
And that's the issue. It's not about us, even when we think we're doing the right thing.
There's so much ego in all of giving. So much of charity. People are. It's sadly, that's involved in it,
or projection and living and being a human being. Every moment is a
projecting
moment.
So how long were you guys on the camp? for?
So we were there for 4 weeks the first time. We again went back to show them the film. They were like the most terrifying screenings we've ever done. You know, it's like you're in a refugee camp. This is like, these are people putting their lives on the line because back at home, you know, if the wrong person sees it, it could affect their families.
Yeah.
So we had to be super careful that people were really comfortable telling their stories, and going back and making sure again was scary, because if they had changed their mind, we're like, we've decided we'll take it out if you're not comfortable.
You only screened it for the people who you interviewed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the time,
we don't even do that on the podcast.
yeah, we're trusting you guys. But it was great though, and they really loved it. And again, it like clicked, and like, oh, these like, you know, 3 goofy guys, like we had no idea what they were really doing, but being able to see it was really important. And eventually we did a big screening in Amman, and the main subjects of the film came and they got up to speak instead of us talking at the film. And one of those really amazing moments where, you know, hearing Raouf talk after his film was like, wow.
That's kind of your dream as a filmmaker, that like you can then kind of get out of the way at the end and let the people really, you know, tell their story.
And it started to, and the really cool news is actually one of the main characters, after 3 years of us really trying, he got resettled to Canada. And
I saw that.
We just released like a small video about Ismail El Hariri and his family. And, you know, it's pretty wild to think his school had been interrupted. He was studying to become a French teacher back in Syria. He had to leave for Zatari in 2012.
Yeah.
Right. And so he was in the camp for 2 years by the time we got there.
Yeah.
And, you know, he now 2018, 6 years
Scotia.
later, he's in Nova Scotia. And I think that's one of the coolest stories, is just his perseverance and the stuff he's been doing in the camp, and then being recognized by this community in Canada and them actually sponsoring him to be resettled is like one of these dreams come true.
Yeah.
And we have some big things up in the works with him telling his own story, continuing to tell that story. So really excited.
He had a lot of personality, that guy.
Oh, he's great. And he's like this incredible chef. And oh, man.
Yeah, it's really the apples.
He's
and
just the
design.
man. And,
yeah, he could like carve these apples into birds. And the food in the camp, like we lost weight in Guatemala. We like gained weight in the camp.
Yeah,
it was
they're
crazy.
feeding you guys. We got that Middle Eastern culture.
Oh, man. The food is incredible.
I heard they got their delivery system going on.
Oh,
too,
yeah.
You guys are saying?
They can deliver pizzas. There are no addresses. There are no streets. And they can somehow deliver pizza to your tent.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Like the UN has
Thin
no
crust?
idea how it does it.
Yeah.
That
Gluten-free.
wood
Get
fire
whatever you're looking
pizza.
for.
Which kind of even hurts you more, right?
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you see this much entrepreneurship.
Oh
and-
yeah, there's this. That's what's pretty amazing about the camp, is they've built, and the UN manager talks about this, is like we were building a camp and they were building a city. And I think that's something, again, it's like even though the conditions aren't great, like people find joy out of dignity, and they find joy when they can have opportunity. And there's actually 2 camps in Jordan now. One's Azraq, which has better conditions but doesn't have an economy and is pretty isolated. And then there's Zatari camp, which has worse conditions but has a multi-million-dollar economy. And people are far happier in Zatari than they are in Azraq, you know, and people really want to have...
Azraq is the one in Lebanon, right? Or no?
It's close, but it's actually like kind of in the middle of nowhere in Jordan.
Oh, it's in Jordan. Okay.
Still in Jordan.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's actually towards Lebanon.
Did you guys feel you're threatened or that your lives are in danger at any point in the camp?
Oh,
Because I know 7 miles away there's war going on. So
Before going, I think we were really scared. I mean, we'd not ever been to the Middle East before, even, and kind of going into near Syria, and people. It was interesting, even like telling friends and family what we were gonna do. Right, we're pitching them this idea, and they're like, we got a very negative feedback from people before we went. That you should.
Are you crazy?
Are you crazy? What are you doing? You could get killed and yada yada. And when we arrived in the camp, I mean, we did a lot of preparation. We had all different security protocols of what could happen. We worked very closely with the UN, but the second we arrived in the camp, I think we drank 10 cups of tea that first day. We were welcomed into everybody's tents, and immediately, never once in the month living in the camp did we feel unsafe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you feel about the overall management of the camp, from UNHCR?
So I don't really think camps should exist in general. I don't think it's the right approach to. I mean, it's a you feel like you're trapped, you know, even if it is a better camp like Zatari. And the more that they can feel like cities, and the more that and it's tough because Jordan, of course, politically it's very hard. You don't want people to stay, you know, you have Palestinian refugee camps still throughout the Middle East, you know, however long later. And so there's a lot of sensitivity towards it, but at a human level, it really, camps just stagnate, and it's not the right solution.
This like core stat that we heard blew our mind around this, that on average refugees are displaced for 17 years. So if you're putting somebody if the refugee camp is the solution for a 17-year problem, it's not right. I mean, it's a short-term, it's a Band-Aid solution to a long-term problem.
Yeah.
And Zatari is kind of a hybrid where there aren't fences around the camp, and there's an economy, and it feels more like a city, but that's not how all camps feel like.
Yeah.
And so the more that we move towards having a dignified solution, providing people with actual jobs and a living, it's just so much better.
Yeah. Some of the camps in like Rohingya and
they're terrible.
A lot worse.
And even though it's only been a year or so, or for the Rohingya, they'll probably be there for a long time.
Sounds like, have you visited some camps in the
I haven't, but I've done a lot of research because like I said, I'm kind of working with UNHCR. I was raised some money from Ramadan earlier this year, and I'm working on going to. And I was trying to choose if I should go to Bangladesh for the Rohingya camps, or if I should go to one of the camps, the one near Lebanon or Zatari.
Yeah.
And I kind of decided. That's why I just did a lot of research on them, and I just felt like the ones for the Rohingya seemed to be a lot worse and a lot bigger.
Yeah, I mean, right now there's
1,000 people in camps.
So crazy.
Just really bad conditions. But overall, I thought I could probably be more effective because of my background for the Syrians. So I thought that's the choice I made. So far.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth seeing. And people are. I mean, there's like incredible artist collectives in Zatari. It's people are really doing stuff to restart their lives.
3,000 businesses you guys mentioned.
Yeah, 3,000 businesses. You can multi-million-dollar economy.
You can buy a wedding dress. You can buy a Slurpee. You can buy fresh falafel, obviously. But I mean, literally anything.
That makes me happy to know that life goes on there, like doing things.
Yeah.
Syrians are hustlers, man. I mean,
man.
Yeah, serious.
No, it's true,
historically speaking, too.
Right. That's what we heard every time we went. They're like,
and they're
Syrians
proud of
will figure out how to make it happen.
And it's also like, I mean, imagine if we were forced to flee your home, you'd be immediately looking for a sense of normalcy, for a sense of, kind of something you could be in control of. And that makes sense why people would start to try to work or to want to not just eat the, strange rice that the UN gives you, but like make your own homemade falafel because that's what home's like. You want to create that for your children. And it just makes a lot of sense when you really break it down.
Yeah.
And is there a heavy undertone of sadness that you guys are feeling, or no?
Yes. I mean, there's an underlying level of trauma. It's not just sadness. It's every single person you talk to has lost some family member in a horrible, horrible way. And it's just that collective, and people put on such a good front, and it, like they are so kind, and the hospitality in some ways masks that. Yeah. But underneath is still just, I mean, that's what's scary about this, is that a whole generation of people with this trauma will one day be responsible for rebuilding the country. And if we don't provide people with the psychosocial support, the UN is doing a really good job of trying to provide these services, and we're just not supporting it in nearly a big enough way. And that's why they like psychosocial services, which seem to come, after those kind of basic needs, and sometimes get forgotten, are like critical.
The UN last year was 51% funded in what they wanted for this crisis. So if you've got half the money that you need, and you need to provide food, shelter, water, psychosocial support, education, what do you start to cut out of that? And you have to cut something. And so,
and you also, I think you mentioned something, a lot of the countries who pledged money, they didn't even pay. How does that work? I mean,
right. So, I mean, it's, you make this big show, you pledge all this money, and then following through is the big issue, right? You don't actually give the money.
It's just PR. I mean, you could do that over and over.
It is.
I'll give
honestly
$15 billion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you just say these things, and
bullshit.
And
really
without pressure from, us all kind of telling our governments to follow through with this, it just doesn't happen. But I mean, yeah, it's
and there's a lot of competing interests right now out there, right? So like, you know, people yell about the Syrian refugee crisis for a week, and then like a week later they're like, oh, did we solve that? You're like, no, this is a very long ongoing crisis, but people's attention spans are really limited, and there's so many issues that people are getting kind of pulled to care about, that I think that's why people can get away with not following through on pledges and things like that.
Seems like you guys are handling these type of letdowns and the frustrations pretty well, because there are documentary filmmakers that go a little mad after these type of projects, right? Like the guy that did the Africa thing, like he went a little nuts.
We have a lot of friends who have who go a little nuts. I mean,
they do it, right? I mean,
we all
an
do
artist is already nuts to
PTSD.
begin with, but
It just depends on when you're talking to us too.
It's like a fake smile. Clown tears.
but I guess these are spiritual practices that you guys are doing essentially, right? You guys are going in there and touching your heart, and then you come back. How do you ground yourself? How do you not walk by the Starbucks and look at people and like, you guys are pathetic? You know, like that happens. You become a little judgmental possibly because you have this other version of reality all of a sudden, right?
Right.
Yeah.
How do you find the balance between these two? What's the process?
I mean, I think a couple things. One thing that's sad is how actually easy it is for us to adjust back to life in the U.S. or life in our home country after travel, whether that's just us personally, but also what we've seen amongst friends or others who've traveled abroad, and then you come back to your normal life and you can adjust back pretty quickly. And that's why we often talk about how experiential learning or service in this way isn't just a single action that changes your life. It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle.
You got to continually be putting yourself in a position where you are constantly pushing yourself, where you're pushing your comfort zone, where you're learning new things with your intentions, and you have to set those intentions, and that I think also helps you deal with coming to terms with a lot of that inner trauma you might be dealing with, or inner frustration. Instead of just pushing it down, you actually are forced to work it through.
And I think it's, again, coming back to this idea of community. People remind you of your intentions, and surrounding, luckily we have incredible people that we work with at Living on One. You know, we have Jenna, who's full-time, and there's like 7 of us who are not always full-time, but constantly working on these projects. And, you know, all of these people have devoted their lives to telling these stories and reminding each other about that intention. And someone recently said really well, is especially, you know, with our president who's intentionally throwing us off balance, it's so important to find, 1, what we believe in, but then 2, also the community that will support those beliefs and re-find our balance. And I think that I find my balance through that community that we've built around Living on One and around these films. And I think it's so important, because when I come back, and, you know, sometimes we'll do crazy things and be like, right after shoot, we'll like have 5 weeks of speaking and shooting and filming, and you kind of get disconnected from that community, and then you do realize that when you come back, it's so important to reset.
Essentially you come back to a circle of people that have the same, and I'm sorry to cut you off,
no, exactly,
the same understanding as where you were already. You may not be there in a physical form, but you're there amongst people that have the same intention of love, service, and spreading the beauty that we can.
Exactly.
Okay, so you don't miss a beat, and they help you ground you, and
they are critical. You know, and it is helpful to have a mom who's a therapist.
That
new? Is that a new jacket?
The therapist moms really help too, and just to keep you, keep you grounded.
Asking the good questions.
But it's not. I mean, the thing is, hey Jenna. But it's not. But again, the idea that we could say that we've solved that problem for ourselves is jumping way too far. Right? It's a whole process, and each film is a new process of learning, and each film is a new process of dealing with these issues in a new way. And so I think that will always be a challenge, no matter what, as a storyteller.
I got you. If I don't want to hijack the mic, I'll make this a whole psycho-spiritual thing. Go.
Psycho-spiritual. Actually, I have a question for my dear friend Shireen. She's an attorney with UNHCR. She actually connected me.
Dear friend.
She really wanted to be here tonight. She couldn't make it. She's in Orange County. But the question is, what personal challenges did you have going to live in Peña Blanca and Zatri from a privileged life that were not depicted in the documentaries, because the documentary is not about you, right? So you just you can't take your own, make it like it's your problem. So what personal things that were not depicted did you guys deal with?
I mean, we talk a little bit about this, but again, removing your ego a little bit. It's like, oh, I went to this really expensive college, like I know best. And I think realizing that no, you don't know best is really hard. You can say it, but when you get in a situation and you're like, why are you making this decision? It's tough. And I think that comes from our privilege, and it's hard to remove that sometimes. And it's really been a practice in intention and reminding each other that this is like not our role is really important. That's like been huge and very hard. Yeah.
And I think for me, another thing that we didn't really talk about in Living on $1, but was a huge part of it for us, was the change from constant stimulation into what that experience was like in Guatemala. Whereas when we're here, if you start to feel sad, you go for a run, or you eat something, or you call a friend, or you do something. Whereas in Guatemala, during that experience, there was nothing there's no distractions. You're forced to deal with your own thoughts, and you're forced to just work that through, go through all that sadness, and then you come out the other side, or you're forced to deal with whatever frustration that might be, and then come out the other side. And it was so interesting not having any of those distractions that we constantly use as crutches all day, every day in our regular lives, and to just have to deal with yourself and go through it.
It's dope.
That's why I go to that 10-day silent meditation.
I could go for hours on
hard.
So, he's done it. I'm planning on doing it.
Oh man, I feel like I would go nuts. 10 days without talking.
Which means you probably needed more, right?
Yeah, exactly. I definitely should do that.
That's beautiful.
But also about the funding, we kind of talked about the Peña Blanca project, but with a bigger project like this, where did the funding from that come from? Or did you guys raise money before, or you just started doing it with your own money and then kind of?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit production company. So we're, all the money from our past film and films kind of are reinvested. The speaking is reinvested. So we're able to fund part, like that initial really scary idea parts ourselves until you actually have some footage to show some people. Luckily with Salam Neighbor, Salam Darwasa, and our friend Mohab Khattab, we actually co-created this film, and it was really important to create a team that was half Arab and half American, which is what you see on camera, but is also what's behind camera. The editors, there was 2 editors, one was from Egypt and one was from LA. Just trying to create a story that's so based in the Middle East. It was so important to have half the team be from the Middle East, and so they helped. They did everything was half and half, which was really cool to find someone who believed in the story from the beginning. And so finding those people was great. They're all done on very shoestring budgets, so it's the money hasn't really gotten in the way.
What's nice is we're hoping kind of as we move forward, these films, if somebody goes and buys it online or Netflix picks it up, that money can then help fund our next film. So it's amazing that each person who has gone out to watch this film is helping us fund our new film right now. And so things like that are really, really helpful as individuals to keep supporting in this work. Okay.
Because this question was actually from someone who's a fan of yours and wants to follow in the same footsteps, and, she wanted to know how she could raise money for the project. So
I mean, our first film, we literally made that film on about $7,000 total. And so that's not normal for a budget for a film, but it can be done. I mean, if you make it happen.
Speaking of that, I have a filmmaker friend that is asking, what's the future of filmmaking and bringing the human story into the big screen based on your opinion or vision of the future?
Ooh, man.
I mean, it's interesting. Like, we've even started to see a lot of, virtual reality storytelling or, short form storytelling versus these longer form documentaries. And to us, I mean, each of these formats, you just choose the format to fit the story, right? So like with virtual reality, we did a short film in Jordan on a refugee following that fit really well with virtual reality, and we wanted to then have it as an installation at the Holocaust Museum actually in Washington, D.C., and that was something that people could go to over and over again and experience this journey.
Big part of the future, huh?
Yeah, which I think was, is really interesting. It's fun to play with that. But then there's certain stories that to us, this still that feature documentary format is it's just so
classical,
perfect for, and you can, even the way that it's still structured right now, that people are watching them on Netflix, and you can have that kind of broad audience where you put somebody through an experience for an hour and 10 minutes, they're going to be more emotionally invested than if they just watched a 2-minute video on YouTube on their phone.
So the change is there's so much more of available ways to tell these stories, and I think we'll continue to get better and better at finding which stories meet the right platform.
Yeah, exactly.
And VR is very specific, and feature
I can
films
see how
are very
VR
specific.
and documentary just go so hand in hand together, right?
Yeah, and it's fun.
Virtual reality
really
documentary.
cool.
The more that you can interact with it too, the better. And Chris was just at this amazing
it's called Carne y Arena, which is it's an experience of what the border crossing's like for a number of families coming across from Mexico and Central America, and it was an incredibly powerful experience. And they put you in this big room, and you've got a headset on, and the sound design around you is really intense, and you can actually feel the like dust and sand and wind blowing around you, but you're also in this 360 headspace. No, this is an experience I just saw. That's it's been in LA and DC at the LACMA for this last year.
Yeah.
And it's called Carne y Arena. It's still on in DC, so if anybody's listening from DC, go check it out. It was super powerful.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But I think it's fun. I mean, there's a lot of stories to be told and new formats to play with.
Are you guys gonna work a future project together again, or?
Yeah,
we're never. No.
Wow, we clearly disagree with. We have different understandings of what's happening.
Okay, let out the dirty laundry.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got like 4 projects in the works, which is really
4
fun.
of them.
Yeah.
And one darker than another. That's you guys' thing. How darker can you guys get?
Yeah.
Depends on the sun.
We've got some pretty heavy topics for sure, but the people that are in them bring so much just joy, and like they're just great. Like that's who you want to see.
You don't want to talk about the subjects yet. The topics.
Well, no. One of them is focused on immigration, which we've actually been following Carlos for the last 8 years. Chino, sorry, from the first film. His nickname is Chino. So we can't tell you too much about it, but we've had this privilege of continuing to tell that story, and we'll be able to release more very soon. And he's an incredible young man, and that's like a big project of ours.
And the idea of, again, like for us, we've spent so much time building trust with different communities or following stories over long periods of time. It's kind of this idea of like a boyhood like story where you're following an experience for a 10-year period and really getting to know what's the subtleties of what somebody's going through.
I love the continuing stories.
Yeah.
You guys should definitely keep doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Because you see that.
And it's cool. We get to, and so some of the other ones, last year we got to work with Google and launch on Google's homepage this site called Searching for Syria, which answers the top 5 questions being asked about the Syrian refugee crisis. And having a partner like Google and the UNHCR actually was also made it with that kind of platform is so cool. And that was inspired from Salam Neighbor. And so around these core big, feature films, you're able to build all these, like the exhibit in the Holocaust Museum, or like the this project with Google. So we try and do that. We try to create these feature films and then build like smaller projects around them.
Does it become a concern to like get caught up in the politics of things and the people in the backdrop and how they may just pulling strings and maybe using projects like this to fund their own is that a thing?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be very careful of
like, do you guys
who
get
you work
ever?
with, and
or, I mean,
Well,
your dad's CIA, so
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the most important thing is, okay, do I stand by everything that I put in this film? Like, do I believe in this product I just made? And then hopefully with that, I mean, people are going to use content however they might want to use it. And you can't really control that once it's out there. I mean, people are going to watch your film or maybe share your film, and you try to use it for their own means, but that's not
so
really.
Even if somebody comes in and is like, I have this much money and go make this.
No, I'm talking more like once a film is released. I mean, if somebody.
I'm talking about in the before a film is made? Or investors?
Yeah, so with our
things?
films, they're all independently funded, and we only work with people that are very much on the same page. So we haven't had any issues with that.
Okay, so you do screen that type of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
If someone comes, I'm gonna give you this much money, but we don't want this type of thing.
No.
Yeah.
If there's like creative, if they're trying to like already tell you what the story is before the story is filmed, that's a problem.
Because the story is found through, I mean, the impact is found, the story is found through filming it. I mean, it's through listening to the stories, and then you figure out where this all goes.
And that's what makes y'all special, actually.
Yeah. And that human kind of character-driven story is something we find really compelling. So letting those stories drive the film versus like, you know, you might have, I'm trying to think of another really good doc, like the 13th or the 13th, which was an incredible film. I saw that. Which one was it? It's Ava DuVernay's film about the 13th Amendment, which is an amazing film. It's just a very different way of storytelling, and it's using experts to tell this kind of historical story, whereas our films tend to use like one or two characters and through their experience tell a story. Sure. And so there's so many different ways to do a doc. We just feel really compelled by kind of character-driven stories, subjects that are driving the stories. Okay. So it's kind of just a different approach to how you create these narratives.
Navid, do you have? I'm sure you have a lot of questions.
I did, but thankfully you guys covered most of it. I literally had the same questions that you had.
What does it say?
Prior to going to Syria.
I'm just kidding.
What?
I was just gonna mess with you.
Yeah, you just asked the last one as far as like the politically charged backlash or engagements that you may have come across in doing not necessarily the Guatemala or living on one, but especially.
Well, it's interesting when the film releases. I mean, we've seen you get some people who are very kind and will, you know, send you messages saying like, thank you for sharing this, thank you for this, you know, peace and love,
and then you have Huffington Post,
and then
right,
and then you get people who will I'm talking more just about the commenters online or people who message you, where, you know, we've gotten a lot of hate mail for telling a story, even a positive story about the Middle East, and sharing these stories about our friends in the refugee camp, or at events where people will ask us questions that aren't really questions but more statements, you know, being very anti-Islam or anti.
So you guys don't get screened in the South, is what you're saying?
Well, no, but we made a very active effort to make sure, because those are the events we wanted to.
They converted him, Jim. Look at the beard.
I was gonna say,
I know. I'm like, I'm just from Seattle. That's what we do in Seattle. We grow beards.
I was gonna be like, do you guys get accused of being like closet Muslims?
Yeah, got him, Jimmy. I mean, so. You've done screenings, you know, all over the country, and really made it an intention to go to places that normally don't engage with these issues, but actually have opportunities to. So in most cities around the country, there are resettled refugee populations, and there are opportunities to volunteer and get involved. And so when we can go to Omaha, Nebraska, and be like, hey, watch this film, and hey, you can actually go immediately meet someone who's gone through this experience, and you can give back. It's a really cool connection for people. And so beyond just giving money, we really ask people to give some time, and even just taking a newly resettled refugee to the grocery store because they might not have their driver's license yet can actually be so helpful.
Yeah, it's probably the best way to make change, right? I mean, how else can you make change?
Yeah, by meeting people. And like, that's like, you know, we got involved because we met Salam Neighbor at a coffee shop who told us her story about being the daughter of refugees. Like, how cool is it if people can go and have that same experience for themselves?
Okay. Yeah, my question is pretty much the same with the, because I kind of dealt with that, trying to raise money for refugees because I have Iranian background, from comments from Iranians. Did you guys get comments like, we have our own problems in the country, why are you guys focusing on helping foreigners and stuff like that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, a lot for sure.
Probably.
Yeah. You get a lot of people who say that, and you know, it's an easy one to reply to, where, you know, it's not a zero-sum game. You know, you can help people from both sides. And actually, I think from our standpoint, welcoming refugees into the U.S., for example, helps America. It makes America stronger. It makes the fabric of our communities more diverse and more successful. And you can actually look back throughout history of how refugees have had a huge positive impact on the U.S. And so that one's one of my favorites to get because it's so easy to speak with someone about.
Yeah. Because I had that I mean, they're just a minority. Most people don't think that way because that's why they gave so much money and stuff like that. But there's a minority saying that, oh, but when we had the Iran and Iraq war, and we did, I mean, it cost us $1,000 billion, something crazy like that, and we lost over 1 million people. Where were the Syrians? Were they helping us? And I'm like, dude, that's fucking bullshit. If you've been through war, we lost so many people, and no one helped you. You should have more compassion just because of that, and want to help people because you were in that position, you know?
Yeah.
So it just really pisses me off, that kind of shit. But
I mean, it's
I
cool.
see that it happens with everybody.
When we found all these old amazing photos of Greek refugees taking refuge in Aleppo, Syria, after World War II, and these, and you're like, yeah, Syria had done that in the past, and there are examples of this all over the place too.
Yeah. I mean, some people that's the thing. Some people don't even know the history if anybody did help or not. They just want to come with negative comments. That's just how the online world is, regardless, whatever you do, how positive it is, someone can just say some stupid shit.
And
this is something we do. We reply to every commenter no matter what.
Oh, wow.
And so awesome. We'll like try to engage them in dialogue because we believe in that you need to be having these conversations. And it's funny, actually, most of the time, if you reply back with a thoughtful response, well, actually, a number of times we'll get apologies. People are like, well, sorry, I didn't think you'd actually read this. Or, sorry, I didn't.
That's a common thing.
I was, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Or, I mean, and then sometimes you don't actually change somebody's mind. But on a couple ones that you do get, you're like, that was worth it.
Exactly. That's happened with me, too, when people say something and then they never expect you to respond. They don't think I'm even going to see it. Then you see it, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm actually a big fan. And I don't know. I was going through a bad day or something like that. Yeah. Funny. So what happened to your wrist? If it was Chris, just blink twice.
So I was roller skating actually at a roller rink, which was the second time. I know, second time in my life, which was unfortunate.
In the last, I think you're never going back.
Yeah,
right?
The last song, this guy just took me out. I was like, wow. I thought, well, you never know. It broke, but
we've been getting on these birds and limes a lot,
Oh yeah.
by Venice. My friend ate shit really hard the other day.
Really? On a bird?
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. Some girl was passing by. He kind of checked the girl out. Then he went into the hole. Flip. His chin hit the concrete.
Oh man.
Nima, the other.
Man, getting hurt as an adult though is the worst.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, I actually I'm supposed to go film and I have things I need to do.
I got shit to do.
Yeah.
Quick question. So you guys are doing public speaking a lot now, huh?
Yeah, we do. It's cool because we get to show clips of the videos along with our speaking. So we get to break up our talking every 5 minutes with a different kind of piece of a film or a small clip. So it's something
how'd you guys get so good at it? Is it just through practice, or is it
just doing it as much as possible? You got to get out there.
You didn't work something or take any type of classes or listen to anything
So
in
one of the
particular?
mentors, again, this guy, Charles Sy, who works with young entrepreneurs, he actually coached us through our first TED Talk and kind of got us started and kind of showed us how to tell a story. And
he's got good talks on TED.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
He's got some great stuff. If you look up Charles Sy, he's got some great stuff. And just finding people to mentor us and just getting out there and speaking as much as possible.
And initially, pleading with people to let you come speak. Let me plead. And you're speaking to 5 people, but you give it your all and your passion. And then next time there's 10 people there, and then 20, and then this last year we got we got that audience of we had 11,000 eighth graders, and man, the energy of 11,000 eighth graders was amazing.
Oh yeah, amazing. Thank God for videos, right? They'll watch a video if you.
But that's why, we've had the most fun, honestly,
so what
doing
tips
it
do you
with
guys have,
doing it with schools.
Public speaking
tips.
A big thing is we don't actually memorize word for word what we speak. We write these kind of bullets out, and so it's much more natural if you know where you're going, but aren't trying to remember what exact word comes next.
That fucks you up a little bit.
Yeah, it's just you're like, oh, I forgot this word, and it screws you up. And instead, if you know what's coming next and what bullet point you're getting to next, it's super helpful.
Yeah, you know the points, and you have the material up here.
Exactly, and then practicing. It's a lot of hard work. I mean, getting people to listen to you. It's so embarrassing to go and speak to, you know, your friends and family, but they'll give you real
How did
feedback.
you guys prepare for the TED Talk thing?
Oh man, we
did
were.
you practice?
It was exhausting.
You guys got pretty lame about it, huh?
This was our
setting
first big speaking gig, and this
it was so nerve-wracking.
You know, we were still in college. We'd never done it before, and we were up literally until 4. You know, like we slept for maybe an hour, and we were just.
That's it.
Yeah, it was, and then afterwards.
Well, we only heard about the talk. They invited us 2 weeks before the talk was going to happen, and so we started trying to like put it together. But we also had to edit the videos and kind of figure out what we were saying, and so it all came together so fast. And we had to fly to Argentina to give it. And so basically, even still the night before, we were like working on it to figure out.
And then afterwards, when we thought we were finally done, then we started getting interviewed in Spanish, and so it was like, oh my gosh, you know, trying to like do interviews in Spanish after being exhausted. It
Were
was
you
just
happy with
crazy.
the output?
Yeah, it was.
It's not our best, I don't think.
It's
I mean,
hard
we
to
look,
watch yourself 5
Yeah.
years ago. You know,
Yeah, it
it's
was
like
good
we've come a
first time.
long ways. You know,
Yeah, you look back and you're like, oh, you know, we were trying to like speak a little bit too much, like word for word, I think, of like what we in that one. Whereas now, you know, we do it a lot more.
And the
naturally.
jokes are hard too. The jokes, you know,
Jokes
if
are
they're gonna
tough.
work or not. You know,
Right.
you
Yeah,
gotta laugh from
jokes
the
are
audience.
yeah, and it's, you know, it's a Argentinian audience.
Yeah,
so it's
yeah,
like,
like
is this gonna
translate the-
land?
Yeah.
It's like, oof.
One thing I always do now at every talk is before you walk up on stage to actually give your talk, I walk around the like crowd a little bit and just talk to individual people, and it just gets your like. It gets you going a little bit. It gets your nerves off, and it gets you used to speaking. And then by the time you get up on stage, you don't have that first 2 minutes of kind of awkward getting yourself back into the groove.
You guys do encore if the audience wants more. Once you guys not imagine.
Bring him back.
We should. I'm gonna start adding that, man.
Drop the mic.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to cover or say just a little bit about the social media series that you're doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, we have the feature documentaries that, you know, is a specific product that you put out online, but then we have so many other stories that you're finding along the way. You have so many other amazing characters you've run into. So we've actually just started doing a social media series of these little stories along the way. We've got a number of them up on our website and Facebook that people can check out at Living on One on Instagram or Facebook. And each one really answers kind of one really unexpected question or story and
Like
takes you in
what?
that in like 1 or 2 minutes.
Like what? What type of questions?
So, you know, one, for example, takes you on an experience of what is the language that people are learning in school in Guatemala. So you have all these kids who actually speak Cachiquel typically, but then they learn actually the most important thing that they're learning in school is Spanish. And you like never think about how for these kids in Guatemala, you assume they already know how to speak Spanish, but so much of the population is Mayan. And if they get access to Spanish, they can then have so much more access to jobs, to information through social media, through news and other things like that, and the importance of like learning Spanish at preschool, for example. Or
another one is, you know, looks at what happens if you get left in the middle of the desert by your smuggler, your coyote.
Yeah, I like that question.
Yeah. And it's just like, it's a.
Why would you start with that?
Yeah.
You're not selling it, bro.
yeah,
Jenna, what the fuck?
Exactly. Jenna's.
I'm sitting here stressed out. I'm like, well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's good, but it's very niche.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. And so this is the story of one of our friends in Guatemala. He got ditched in the desert by his coyote, and then what you do, and the piece kind of follows these unintended consequences. He luckily got picked up by Border Patrol. He was gonna starve to death in the desert, and got sent back to Guatemala. But when he got sent back, he still had all this debt, right? And so he's all of a sudden in this cycle of being forced to try over and over again, because the only way to pay off that debt is by going to the U.S.
In 2 minutes.
Yeah,
That's a
so
2-minute
it's a
thing.
very
2-minute piece.
fast
So
explanation
you guys
of the
are
story.
teasing people, basically, where
Yeah.
people are going to be like, they should make a movie out of that. And that's when
Yeah.
you know you did your job well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I don't know about yours, but that one, yeah.
Yeah, you can tell a lot
I'm sorry,
in
I'm
2
good.
minutes.
no, fair enough.
No, for sure. And so there's all these stories, and you know, we actually, because we're so involved in shooting this film, you know, we also got to witness a moment when a little 6-year-old girl was reunited with her mom after being separated. You know, this whole thing with kids being separated
I
from their
saw that one.
families.
Yeah.
And so we already released that one, but you know, this little tiny girl, and seeing some of those moments can be so powerful, even in a minute.
It is.
You know,
because so many of the kids actually have not been reunited.
Still
with
have
their
not
parents.
been
It's
reunited.
so sad. Yeah.
yeah. So
Wow.
it's we have tons of stories like
It's been
that.
a couple of months they haven't been reunited.
Yeah,
You know?
and then some really fun places like where to get the best Guatemalan food in LA. There's the largest.
Where? I want to know that.
There's this night market in LA that's like the largest night market in a Guatemalan night market in the U.S. and it's amazing. It's like a whole block of just Guatemalan food.
Wow.
Where is that?
Are they just open at nighttime?
So
It's the first time I'm taking
Really
notes.
hungry.
dude.
Yeah, take notes. It's got they
We
have
know
these-
the way to your heart is through food. Huh?
yeah.
Food and travel.
Yeah.
So some of these really fun stories too. Not just everything is heavy, you know.
Chris, could you tell us a little bit about searching for Syria.org? And then also if you could touch on, because I don't consider this a shameless plug, as I mentioned, from the time your movie came out, I was trying to kind of spread it and have all my friends watch it. And I think I saw on one of your websites, you can actually get some gear that's made, like your t-shirt and so forth,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so after we made Salam Neighbor, we actually got approached by Google to work with them to create a site called searchingforsyria.org, which actually answers the world's top 5 Googled questions about Syrian refugees. So, and it answers it in this cool microsite that takes you through using virtual reality video, amazing just like visualizations of different stats. And, you know, so what would you guess is the most Googled question about Syrian refugees?
Something about Islam.
Yeah, so it's actually very basic. What is a refugee?
What is a refugee?
That's the most Googled question. So these things that people are actually interested in from the base level of realizing, you know, everybody in the world is looking for information. You need to answer the first question: what is a refugee? And then the second one, you know, what was Syria like before the war? You know, and these things that are very kind of might seem basic, but are actually have very interesting and fascinating history behind them. Or, you know, before the war actually had more.
It's very important, I think, for people to know that.
Yeah, Syria before the war had more annual tourists than Australia. It was like, you know, there was yes, there were some challenges, but also, you know, a huge thriving tourist industry. Damascus was the oldest thriving city in the world. And so things like that, I think, are very helpful for people to understand, and just a very
And the hopeful
quick,
thing,
digestible
the
site.
like uplifting thing is the 5th question is how can I help?
See, that's the thing. And the
Wow.
And
only
that's
way
cool.
you have that mentality is to understand. And once you learn about the other person, then you can change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the problem that's happening in our country today is they're creating a lot of polarity with this whole red and blue Republican Democrat thing.
Yeah, it's
where
incredibly
they don't know
divisive.
about each other and they're hating each other.
Yeah.
And for you to say that, let me find the way to love you, is almost shameful now. So it's like, no, if you're standing for something, you got to hate the other side.
Right.
And I'm like, that's not how change is going to happen.
No.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
So the more you
Well
get
put.
to know.
Not
Well,
everyone's doing that, though.
Yeah.
No, that's the nice thing is
Yeah.
there are people that are looking for other
But it's
ways.
hard because if you stand for something, so you're sometimes getting forced into a box
Absolutely.
of
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So it's not a package deal, you know. You
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
feel something from this side and that side. That's the normal way,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
so love is the answer.
love is the
Something.
answer.
I agree.
Yeah.
Sometimes hate really is effective.
Does Jenna have anything else that she'd like?
yeah, wow,
Her-
Jenna from behind
Her Majesty.
Yeah.
Just get her on live.
I think
FaceTime
that's
her.
awesome.
Get her on the show.
That's what's so cool about these podcasts is you can go so many. It's like such a cool format. You can go so deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I feel like we haven't even scratched the surface, but thank you so much for your time. It was truly an honor and a blessing.
Oh,
and you
thank
guys are beautiful souls. I mean, just wonderful,
Yeah.
loving souls. I'm
thanks.
so grateful to just be in your presence and hopefully to kind of hear from you guys from time to time and reach out to you guys.
Yeah.
I'd love that. Thank you
We
so
gotta-
much.
Thank
We
you.
gotta hang out
I'm personally
again,
so
so
inspired.
thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having
have
us.
You guys again, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Nomad out.
Appreciate it.